So I worked in UNI first, UNI Delhi, then UNI Bombay. Then I joined the Daily newspaper, and that was owned by Blitz, and the work began there. Around '83, there was a very major drought in 9 states. So I went out to cover the drought, and that's what I asked the filmmakers today. I went out to cover the drought. It was a very, very powerful experience. But I was a conventionally trained journalist, and what I wrote did not capture that power.
So you sort of then felt
I felt very inadequate. I felt extremely inadequate. That I'd had this extremely powerful experience in the countryside.
You felt you couldn't do justice.
Yeah, because conventional journalism, conventional media are about the service of power. The conventional journalism is about the service of power. It is about serving the powerful.
You're talking about conventionalism 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And today the normal has changed a lot. You've written a lot.
Today it is the exercise of power. But the thing is that when you one of the things was that even today the same structure remains in the sense you do a story, the last word is given to the district collector. The district collector says, "Ye kehta hai," collector saab ye kehta hai. Now this is utter nonsense. Suppose I am covering farming in a district. The district collector may be some 29-year-old who came to the district 6 weeks ago. Is he more important, or is the farmer who has tilled the soil for 45 years more important? So I said that I am not going to play this game by these rules. I am not going to give more importance to the district collector than to the 45 years experienced farmer. When I consider the district collector's words important, I will give them weight. When I don't consider them important, if I do not consider it important, I won't talk to the guy.
Alhamdulillah, you've succeeded in that quite a lot. But
yeah,
today, you've written a lot of the corporate takeover.
So, but at that time, I told myself that I'm going to come back and do this again, and next time I'm going to get it right.
That's when you took the Times Fellowship.
10 years later.
Today, when you see new journalists coming up and this whole corporate takeover of journalism, do you see, you interact with a lot with upcoming journalists, you teach them,
Last 25, 26 years.
Yeah.
Many of your anchors, etc. were my students.
Is that fortunately or is that unfortunately?
They're good ones. They're the good ones. They're the good ones. You can go and see the kind of stuff.
So,
go and see the kind of stuff
what do you
that
think
an Anubhav Bhosle does. Citizen journalism.
Yes,
She was my student. Or a Sarah Jacob did during the US election. My student.
So there is a silver lining in journalism.
There is still autonomy. There is still some space. The fact that I exist proves it. But there is some space, but that space is shrinking and getting more limited.
Do you think this is limited to journalism or in general?
It has everything to do with monopoly. Like for instance in culture, see, all monopolies kill all other spaces. Bollywood as a culture kills every other cultural space. So today, you want to do serious issues, you got to get a celebrity from Bollywood. You want to do something on polio, you got to get Aishwarya Rai. Okay, give me a break. You can do a serious issue and the issue doesn't have to, the issue can justify itself.
But that's
the
not
issue can justify itself, right? So it's also laziness journalistically that you are not able to make an issue compelling. So but the basic reason is not laziness. The basic reason is revenue. You want money.
What's substantial may not necessarily
so,
be.
Bombay Marathon, Mumbai Marathon comes and all the anchors wear shorts and go running with, Preeti Zinta or whoever. This is what sort of journalism is that?
Yeah, right.
So that problem is also, but that is not so much what the journalist does as what corporate media do. That is the ethos, ethics.
So that's the corporate ethics everywhere.
Everywhere, and you're right. So I'm saying it's not just in, but in media it becomes incredibly difficult and different, including in social media. See, the monopolies in media, the monopolies in social media, on the internet, are different and worse from monopolies anywhere else for one single reason. They own your personal data.
Okay, that's true.
The newspaper monopoly, or Facebook and Twitter and Google own your personal data. Right. That is a much worse form of monopoly than any other form of monopoly. All other monopolies have a monopoly over selling you something and taking your money. These guys own your damn personal data. To my mind, that makes them more dangerous than anyone.
What do you say? What does this brood for us?
The thing is that you cannot move forward, you cannot change without breaking monopoly.
Innovation.
Technology can actually help strengthen monopoly. That's what's happened.
That's what's happened in France.
The thing is, you got to have technology and innovations maybe improve things or make them worse.
Depending on how.
Revolutions are made by people. Google and Twitter, I said in the morning, they did not make Arab Spring. That was made by people in the street who had no Google account and no Twitter account and no Facebook account. 99% of them had no such account. And food prices and unemployment did it.
Which is not highlighted.
Basic issues, reaching out to your neighbor, organizing people, these are still at the center. And one of the things that you would have to do in a democracy is to strengthen your public broadcasting. You can laugh at me, but I'm telling you today, the best television discussions are taking Lok Sabha TV, Rajya Sabha TV are having the best political panel discussions because there is no vested interest driving the. There's no vested interest driving that.
Their broadcast. And this brings us to a very central issue, our central issue, student activism. You come from JNU, which has a very rich tradition. But today, what we see around us is there is a very continuing disenchantment with politics among students, a systematic disinterest, disillusion, a politicization. How do you think that grew?
It also has to do with the commercialization of education. I said today, hyper-commercialization and the privatization of everything. Now, if I look what happened since my time in the colleges and universities, today there are far more private colleges, private universities. Okay, now in our time, I was very political in Loyola College in Madras. When I went to JNU, I said, I am not going to get involved in politics. I'm going to study. It lasted exactly 12 hours, my resolution.
Mine lasted 4.
Yeah. So that was the 12 hours I needed to get into the house. So the thing is, what has happened since then? Many of the universities and colleges are private institutions. If you pay, no, it's not that. You pay in Maharashtra, you pay 30-35 lakhs to get into medical college. After that, do you want to strike? You're not going to strike. You're planning your dowry, how to get back your investment.
No, that's true. But even in central universities, a place like this, JNU is a rare exception. A place like
no, but I'm saying generally, you'll find if there are student politics at all, it is only in public universities, not in private. Because in private, the university will not allow it, and student is not interested. He has put 35 lakhs capitation fee to get in there. Why will he go on strike on a principle or a cause? He's not going to do it.
On the other hand, when this Anna movement was going on 2 years ago, this whole knowledge park in Greater Noida, all of those universities had organized their students to go and join them. What was that all?
That is called Malik Ka Union. और मालिकों का स्ट्राइक, मालिकों भी स्ट्राइक करते हैं ना. वेनेजुएला में वही हुआ. Oil unions struck against Chavez.
Basically the oil barons.
Basically the old oil barons corrupting a union and doing it.
Thanks for mentioning Chavez. Latin America brings us a picture where possibly we idealists have come to believe that some sort of people's politics is possible. You know, a kind of using revenues from resources to invest in people's lives. That is possible. Is that sort of a thing possible in India? Or is that a model really to look to?
It is. And I mean, see, the thing is, this is a more complex society than this time.
Venezuela is just 30 million people.
Yeah, so look, I mean, Venezuela will be Bombay and Pune. Okay, something like that. But apart from that, I mean, if you just take rural India, 833 million people, 400 living languages. Some languages spoken by 500 million people, some languages spoken by 5 people, like Saimor in Tripura, 4 speakers only. Okay, now it's a very complex society, and then it's mediated by caste, by class, by region, by linguistic divisions, and all of that.
All of this has combined to, in effect, disenfranchise the people.
I don't think so. I'm saying that you can make that diversity a strong point, but it's complex. It's not simple. What we try doing is, we try finding answers by simplifying or pretending. So, BJP comes along and says everybody should learn Hindi. That is a sure way of breaking up your country.
We have already tried that.
You already tried it. It hasn't worked. There are.
When you think of initiatives like this Aam Aadmi Party?
I think that in the last couple of months, they've taken up better issues. Otherwise, the entire approach to corruption was that of an upper middle class approach. Corruption is the guy in the railway clerk who is charging you 20 rupees more. Corruption is not Mukesh and Anil Ambani and KG Gas Basin and Spectrum scam and Sunil Mittal and 2G scam. Corporate corruption is the biggest corruption in this country. Right? All your bloody scandals are from their activities. But you want to take that up. Recently, they've started challenging Reliance. Not bad, I don't know. But I think that it will be more of a lobby than a political party. I don't see them having that traction.
In that,
they're already split. Anna has pulled out.
Of course. No, in that way, coming back to students again, how can student politics, if at all?
The mobilization for Aam Aadmi and IAC was done by Arnab Goswami. Okay, I'm saying if there was no television,
let's diverse. You know, like we are speaking of public universities. This university has a union, JNU has a union. These unions, how can they contribute to building a kind of politics that,
any university can, any media can. I'm saying, see, that depends on the configuration of political forces in a given place. Again and again I'm emphasizing that a great place to start is your constitution and directive principles. You say that the constitution promised this to our people 60 years ago. I want it delivered. Make it a bill of rights. If you could make right to education from directive principles, then right to work can also come from the directive principles. Right to health and nutrition can come from the. The first directive principle says it is the duty of the state to reduce the economic and social inequalities. That is the first coming. That is the first requirement of the
people is that these directive principles are more rhetorical than substantial. How do we translate them to something that's substantial?
You know, that usually people will say, who, you know, many lawyers will say, they are not justiciable in court. Actually, they are. Otherwise, how did you get this law? Secondly, Justice A.K. Ganguly, Justice Sanghvi have 2-3 times said the directive, Justice Ganguly particularly in 3 judgments, the directive principles of state policy are as important as the fundamental rights. Third, so the Supreme Court itself has taken a position. Third, please read what the clause above the directive principles says. It says, yes, these are not justiciable in a court of law. However, they are fundamental to the governance of the nation, and government policy, state policy must be informed by these principles. So you have a right to even legally fight for it.
Till now, that has just been a fight in court. Do you think it is possible to translate this into a political, particularly a student?
Remember, one right has happened, one right is in process. Right to education has happened, right to food is in process. So let's take the whole damn thing as a Bill of Rights and do it.
Do you think that needs to be transformed into a political movement, or it can be?
I'm saying that you can use it as a common minimum platform amongst various political movements. It is something that people can unite on. If I ask people in Kanyakumari to unite on my political platform, they may not be so keen. If I say, will you unite with me in implementing the promise of the Constitution to the people of India, they will be much more ready to do so.
So what do we need? That is one last question. Do we need a political party or a political movement, or do we need a political strategy that unifies people within diverse political
You need both. You need both. As of today, I mean, if you look, whether you're looking at Spain or Portugal or Greece or wherever everything else is unraveling, you need political movements, and they are going to be left of center political movements, otherwise you'll have fascists. These are your choice. So you need political movements, you need left-wing political movements, but you also need a strategy. Hugo Chavez had a strategy. He had a strategy of making national wealth work for the public. Okay. That's a good place to start.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.